So populism is sweeping worldwide, and you've seen it with Brexit. You've seen it with obviously the election of Donald Trump as president, um, and now you are seeing populism, the rise of populism in Paris, in France, rather. And right now there is an election going on that is pretty hotly contested, and one of the main contenders is a woman named Marine Le Pen. She has been on an anti-EU, anti-immigration, populist platform, uh, and of course she's been demonized by the media. She's been demonized by everybody in the establishment, uh, the leaders of the EU, pretty much all the same people who demonized Donald Trump throughout his campaign are demonizing her. Because in many ways, she's running on a similar platform, especially when you look at her views on immigration. France, in particular, has taken the brunt of the Islamic immigration, and they have actually suffered some of the worst consequences of it. And because of this, there is a lot of support for Marine Le Pen and her anti-immigration views and policies, which many people see as extreme, but many others as well see it as quite rational. Um, and just to illustrate what we're talking about in terms of Islamic terror that has been imported into Europe, particularly into France, I want to bring up this article from Westmonster.com. 238 murdered in France by jihadists since 2015. The devastating scale of Islamic extremism that has struck France has been exposed by new figures that show some 238 people have been murdered by Islamic extremists in France alone since 2015. There have been some 21 Islamist attacks in France since 2015, including the Bataclan massacre and the attack on the offices of Charlie Hebdo. Make no mistake about it, France is at war with radical Islam along with the rest of Europe. As their people go to the poll tomorrow, this is perhaps the defining issue of our time, which will likely play a huge part in deciding who is elected France's next president. So there you have it. You've got a pretty large death toll. As I've said earlier, France has taken the brunt of the Islamic immigration and the terrorism that has been imported into their country because of that. Of course, you've had numerous attacks, like it mentioned there, the Bataclan attack, the Charlie Hebdo attack. Also, you had the Islamist who drove a truck on Bastille Day in France into and killed something like 80 people, I think. And you see this all over Europe. You see it in Sweden, you see it in Germany, you see it all around, in the United States as well. But of course, France has, had the worst of it. And they just had another attack just recently. And an article from The Telegraph illustrates that pretty well. Marine Le Pen gets poll boost after Paris attack as Donald Trump says her chances of victory have improved. So, of course, this attack occurred. One police officer was killed. And in a lot of ways, France and many areas of Europe have sort of been numbed to these events. They've actually, in a sense, gotten used to them, unfortunately. So it doesn't necessarily have the sort of shock and awe sort of value that these types of events would have had in the past. And it's, because of the frequency of these events and that every single time the people in the governments of these different countries come out and say that it's the fault of people condemning Islam. It's the fault of people who are not open enough, who are not tolerant enough to Islam, and because of this intolerance and lack of openness, these types of events occur. They never actually place the blame on the attacker himself or the belief system that caused him to go through with those attacks. The motive, in other words, which time and time again is radical Islam. And then, of course, you've got efforts by the media to downplay these events, to, in many cases, lie by omission, not pointing out key details. And, of course, many times these people that do these events were being monitored previously by the different law enforcement authorities, and oftentimes were known to have extremist views. So, time and time again, you've got this pattern of this stuff happening, and then you had another attack just before the one part of the election in France. And many people just sort of, looked at the event, said it was horrible, and sort of moved on. Again, like I said, it doesn't have the same sort of value, shock value that it used to, unfortunately. But still, because of the timing of this event, this unfortunate event, it is helping to bolster support for Marine Le Pen. So the article goes on. Donald Trump has said the Paris attacks would boost Marine Le Pen's presidential chances after a last-minute poll gave her a modest increase in support. The U.S. president said the shooting would, quote, probably help Miss Le Pen in Sunday's election because she is, quote, strongest on borders and she's the strongest on what's going on in France. Whoever is the toughest on radical Islamic terrorism and whoever is the toughest at the borders will do well in the election, he said. Xavier Jugelet, I probably said that wrong, I'm sorry, 37, a policeman who had been deployed in the 2015 Bataclan attack, was killed in the shooting. Miss Le Pen, the far-right candidate, blasted the mainstream naive left and right for failing to get tough on Islamism, calling for France to instantly reinstate border checks and expel foreigners who are on the watch list of intelligence services. Francois Fillon, the mainstream conservative candidate, pledged an iron fist, quote-unquote, in the fight against Islamist totalitarianism, quote-unquote, if his priority if elected. We are at war, it's either us or them, said the conservative, whose campaign has been weighed down by allegations he gave his British wife a fake job, quote-unquote. That's interesting. Meanwhile, Emmanuel Macron, the independent centrist, quote-unquote, that's my quote-unquote, because he is not a centrist, whom critics dismiss as a soft touch, hit back at claims shutting borders and filling French prisons would solve the problem, saying there's no such thing as zero risk. Anyone who pretends otherwise is both irresponsible and deceitful. So there you have more of the apologist, sort of rhetoric from someone like Macron, who they say is a centrist. Really, he is basically a globalist. He is, somebody who is going to toe the line for the establishment. He's going to toe the line for the European Union. And of course, he is going to continue to push for open border policies that have left over 200, French citizens dead in the last couple of years because of all these different terrorist events that happen time and time again due to the importation of it from terror-stricken countries and oftentimes war-torn countries. So, very unfortunate to see that kind of rhetoric. But again, you've got Marine Le Pen, who has a lot of support right now. And, of course, you've got all the pollsters and all the media saying that there's no way she can win. It's just impossible, just like they were saying for Brexit and just like they were saying for Donald Trump. And, of course, they got it spectacularly wrong on both of those fronts. And of course, it's interesting to note that Marine Le Pen would be France's first female president, and you don't see anybody in the media, anybody in the establishment, even talking about that, even though they said that anybody who didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton was, in fact, sexist. You don't see that same sort of rhetoric with Marine Le Pen because, of course, she does not support the globalist open border policies that they want to see enforced. So again, there you've got some a pretty intense level of hypocrisy from the establishment, from the media establishment, from the Democratic establishment, and others, because they only support a female candidate if it's a female candidate who is a globalist, basically. So hopefully Marine Le Pen can continue to get support, and hopefully she can prove the establishment and the pollsters wrong once again, and prove that populism really is sweeping the globe, and people are sick and tired of establishment, European Union, globalist narratives that cause their countries untold suffering and harm. And now we move on to an article from the Washington Examiner. U.S. forces airstrike kills Taliban leader and 8 fighters in Afghanistan. America, baby. An airstrike killed Qari Tayyib, a Taliban leader, and 8 Taliban fighters in Afghanistan last week, U.S. forces announced on Saturday. Quote, the strike was part of an ongoing efforts to deny Taliban freedom of movement in the area. U.S. forces, Afghanistan said in a statement. Quote, Tayyib has been a target of interest since 2011 and was directly responsible for the deaths of U.S. service members in Afghanistan. The strike did not kill any civilians, according to U.S. officials. So there you have it, more of this current administration following through on its promises to be tough on ISIS, and another day, more bombs dropped on the pathetic, low-life ISIS terrorists. Thumbs up to the Trump administration. It is definitely good to see stuff like that, and they need to start busting out some more of those Moabs, and those mother of all bombs. Those seem to be quite effective, and it just goes to show that this is an administration that is definitely not pulling any punches when it comes to radical Islamic terrorism, no matter where it's at around the world. So definitely good to see that there. And now we move on to an article from National Review. Curtains for NEA and NEH. Supporters of the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities argue that the troglodyte Trump wants to return America to the Stone Age, before Washington, D.C. rescued an uncouth nation from the horrors of square dancing, axe-throwing contests, and wind-swept silence. Quote, without the arts in America, all we have is Trump. Film director Judd Apatow lamented in response to President Donald J. Trump's plan to delete the NEA and NEH's budgets of $148 million each. Quote, after all the wars are fought, what remains are people, art, nature, and culture. Actress Jamie Lee Curtis declared via Twitter, Trump can try, but he cannot cut us out of the picture, quote unquote. According to former soap opera actor and People's Magazine 2014 Sexiest Teacher Alive, Nicholas A. Ferroni, quote, as far as Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos are concerned, artists, musicians, dancers, and performers have no value to society. So you've got the left freaking out, as they've done time and time again, just like they did when Trump was proposing to cut funding for the certain block grant programs to states, and then people said that he was trying to cut funding to Meals on Wheels, and in essence was trying to kill old people, which turned out to be a colossal lie, because only a very small fraction of that funding from those block grants that the states chose to use for that actually went towards the Meals on Wheels. And then, of course, after the cuts were proposed, the donations that they received reached record numbers, because it turns out that people actually are charitable, and according to Bernie Sanders, we're not, but that just goes to show what Bernie Sanders knows. So again, you've got liberals freaking out saying that Donald Trump is trying to destroy modern art and he's trying to, bring us back to some sort of dark age. Again, just ridiculous, apocalyptic, far left, liberal lunacy, as we've been driven into in this current age. And it goes on. Amazingly enough, America was not an aesthetic backwater before President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the NEA and NEH into law in September 1965. Indeed, the generation that preceded these agencies witnessed a fluorescence of innovation, quality, and beauty in elite and popular culture, from Broadway to the big screen, to bookstores and black and white TV, and beyond. Consider just a fraction of what Americans appreciated in the dark days before the NEA and NEH, and then of course it goes on to just list this massive list of all the different artistic and cultural achievements prior to these, the NEA and NEH, of which there were many. And I encourage you to read the article if you would like to go through those. It's a fairly extensive list. The left should stop whining about the NEA and NEH and instead do something productive. They should fight for President Trump's tax cut plan. If Congress snaps out of its permanent vacation and puts Trump's tax proposal on his desk for signature, Hollywood and Broadway artists and executives would see their top rate sliced from 39.5% to 35%. Major media companies such as Time Warner and NBC Universal would see their corporate taxes mobed from 35% to 20%, or even better, 15%. When wealthy people pass away, their death taxes would have plunged from as high as 40% to 0%. Trump's tax system would liberate billions or even trillions of dollars that could be donated to and invested in a new generation of artistic masterpieces, honorable mentions, and beloved near misses. So, they don't focus at all on the tax cuts that he's proposing that would, allow these different industries involved in art, and culture to have more money to be able to put into art and culture. They just get upset at the fact that Trump is going to be cutting government funding to those things, and then the ultimate irony of all of that gets set in at the very end of this article right here. Ultimately, one wonders why celebrities and artists scream for NEA and NEH's salvation. Who do they think will run them for the next 4 to 8 years? Barbra Streisand? Snoop Dogg? If the NEA and NEH survive, their chiefs will be appointed by none other than Donald J. Trump. These new managers will not share the leftist worldview and just might be people whom they actually hate. And that is a very, very good point. These agencies would have been headed by, who knows, Ted Nugent or Kid Rock. I mean, nobody knows. So it really is amazing that the people on the left, the far left, just people in the media, the Democratic establishment in general, are coming out and saying that this is absolutely horrible, when in reality they should be happy about it, because not only are they going to have tax cuts that's going to allow them to put more money into art and culture, they're not going to have organizations headed by somebody who's going to be pushing a completely different agenda than theirs, which is, of course, the far left radical agenda. So just absolutely, absurd level insanity coming from the far left, as usual. And then we move on to the Hill. March for Science rallies draw huge crowds around U.S. So, and another example, Trump is planning on cutting funding to different government programs that go towards scientific research and other things. And of course, again, people are freaking out saying that President Trump is anti-science or something like that. Thousands of people descend on Washington and other cities across the country on Saturday to voice support for science, which calls for evidence-based public policy and increased funding for scientific research. The massive March for Science demonstration was organized in support of evidence-based knowledge in Washington, though many marchers voiced opposition to President Trump's administration, which they view as hostile toward the scientific community. Quote, today we have a great many lawmakers, not just here, but around the world, deliberately ignoring and actively surpassing science. Bill Nye, the quote, science guy, told marchers their inclination is misguided and in no one's best interest. And of course, Bill Nye, the science guy of all people, is being propped up as this just arbiter of absolute universal scientific truth, which is completely absurd because the guy is way more of an actor than a scientist. He has a degree in engineering. He has absolutely no qualifications whatsoever to be talking to anybody about climate science or any other field of science for that matter. Yet he's propped up as this know-it-all of some sorts. And then, of course, you've got Bill Nye, the science guy, who has come out and said that people who deny that man-made climate change are real should potentially be thrown in prison. Yes, he actually supports that. So total, fascistic behavior from some pseudo-scientific actor on the, propped up by the far left. Just absolutely absurd. Some protests on the National Mall wave signs embracing science-related puns, such as one that stated, "Science cuts make me relatively angry," that featured an image of Albert Einstein, a reference to the famous physicist's theory of relativity. Quote, "Pretty absurd that this march is necessary," another sign read. Democratic lawmakers seized on the occasion to hit the Trump administration on what some claimed is an outright denial of scientific evidence and willing disregard of the scientific community. Quote, "Science is real. Climate change is real, and the danger of the Trump administration poses to the future of our environment and planet is real," Representative Peter Aguilar, Democrat, California, wrote on Twitter. Quote, "With an administration that deals in alternative facts, supporting objective science is more important than ever. Hashtag March for Science, hashtag Earth Day." Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat, Hawaii, tweeted. So, of course, you've got the Democrats, capitalizing on this to demonize Trump as being some sort of evil anti-science type of a person. And, of course, again, they don't ever talk about the fact that there's going to be, due to tax cuts, more money in the public sector available for actual scientific innovation, which is where almost all real innovation comes from, not from the government. And then we go on to an article from the Daily Caller, which points out the absurdity of all of this. Scientists plan a march against Trump after ignoring Obama's science problem for 8 years. A group of science enthusiasts are planning a march on Washington, D.C. to protest Donald Trump's supposed anti-science policies. Quote, "There are certain things that we accept as facts with no alternatives," states the group's official website. Quote, "The Earth is becoming warmer due to human action. The diversity of life arose by evolution. Politicians who devalue expertise risk making decisions that do not reflect reality and must be held accountable." But these same scientists were quiet under the Obama administration. The Society of Environmental Journalists criticized President Barack Obama in 2013 for, quote, "taking secrecy to a new level and effectively censoring EPA scientists from reporters." Obama's EPA administrator Lisa Jackson created a controversial secret email account. Email records show that the White House knew about the secret account since at least February 2010. The account was used to conclude outside environmental groups and lobbyists and may have been used to dodge transparency requests. The White House attempted to link the polar vortex of winter 2013 to 2014 to global warming, despite a lack of evidence. It turns out the White House science czar John Holdren based the claim on his personal opinion, not the weight of peer-reviewed science. Quote, "The scientists should be marching to make sure this doesn't happen again," Chip Kappenberger, a climate scientist at the Free Market Cato Institute, told the Daily News Caller Foundation. They should be carrying signs that read, "Less government funding for science." Kappenberger thinks that the Obama that Obama had a, quote, over-enthusiastic approach to the science on global warming, but, quote, got it mixed with his public policy goals and ended up closing off his scientific inquiry, which allowed him to accept the parts of the science he liked. So that's very true. In the last administration, Obama, to try to push towards the 2015 Paris climate agreement, which was an agreement between all these different nations to reduce their carbon emissions, in order to push to have the United States be a part of that, he was willing to use manipulated, admittedly manipulated scientific data that showed bigger warming trends than there actually were. And this happens time and time and time again with the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, the UN organization, and NOAA, which is the organization in the United States that studies the climate. These organizations get caught time and time again tampering with data, using flawed data, using data that's not as good, and using it to push for climate change policy. And so you had the Obama administration abusing the government's role, in the scientific process to, fraudulently push towards climate policies. And now you've got a president who is diametrically opposed to the previous administration's climate policies, and he is going to have an absolutely different approach. He is going to use he would potentially use the scientific apparatus of the government to push towards push towards a completely different goal than that of the last administration, not towards the climate change agenda. So the people on the left, the people in the Democratic establishment, should be absolutely happy. They should be thrilled that this funding to these, these different grants and these different funding mechanisms are going to be cut, because if they stayed in place, they were going to be headed by people. I mean, you've got, for example, the head of the EPA is a guy, Scott Pruitt, who, when he was the Attorney General, actually sued the EPA, and he is now heading it. So these guys should be happy that all these different things are being left into the private sector, not the government, because there is a new sheriff in town, in case you didn't notice. So, I want to go through one last little article here, and this is actually pretty hilarious. So this is from CNN. Sarah Palin, Ted Nugent, and Kid Rock walk into the White House. Sarah Palin with Kid Rock, Ted Nugent in a tow visited President Donald Trump at the White House Wednesday for dinner. The former Alaska governor, who was the Republican vice presidential nominee in 2008, posted a set of photos on her Facebook page from throughout the executive mansion, including the Oval Office. A White House official said the group had dinner with the president, but didn't provide any further details. And so this is just epicness. So the three of them actually went in front of a picture of Hillary Clinton, of all people, and took a selfie. And everybody on the left, the far left, the Democratic establishment, you name it, were freaking out about this. I mean, the girls on The View were just henpecking this, and just everybody is absolutely freaking out. And I mean, this was just a blatantly obvious attempt to troll the left. I mean, this is troll level 1000. And everyone involved knew full well what they were doing. And look, our president is Donald Trump, okay? A guy who does late night tweets about who knows what. If people are going to continue to freak out and blow out of proportion things like this, they're going to continue to happen. And they're going to intensify, in fact. So I would recommend, I think this is hilarious, don't get me wrong, this is great. I would like to see more stuff like this. And if they get the type of reaction they expect out of that, it's going to continue to happen. So just, in terms of fairness to anybody on the left, if you don't want these kinds of things to continue, just ignore them. Just try to ignore them. That would be my advice to you. But absolutely troll level 1000 with Kid Rock and Ted Nugent coming to the White House. And of course, everybody freaked out about that, but nobody liked to mention during the Obama administration how Obama officials were caught walking up to a picture of Ronald Reagan and flipping it off. But you didn't really hear a whole lot of outrage about that because, again, Obama. So, with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, leave a comment if you've got something that you would like to say, any topics you'd like to hear me talk about, or anything of the sort. I'd like to hear from you. So, also, if you would like to hear the audio version of this, I will have that available on SoundCloud, and you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook, and I will have the links for all that in the description. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and may the force be with you.